Well, Frank, thank you for that kind introduction. That was supposed to be fun. I hate it when they say this guy needs no introduction, but invariably they then talk for half an hour and give an introduction longer than my keynote speech, but I didn't have that problem today. Anyways, good afternoon. Frank, you should know, was the Times food critic during most of my years in City Hall. And I will just say that he was not the only Times journalist who affected my appetite. And just in case, because Arthur Sulzberger is here, people always ask me if I'm going to buy the Times. Let me give you an answer. Yes, I buy it every day. Actually, I have a subscription, so I'm not sure I write a check every day or pay cash, but whatever. And I do read it in paper, in case you wanted to know. Let me thank the Times for pulling together this important conference. I think the topic couldn't be more important, and education, as many of you know, has always been a passion for me. One of the reasons that I ran for mayor back in 2001 was to turn around the city's dysfunctional school system, which had been failing for decades, and education has become one of our foundation's core areas of work. And one of the things that I wanted to use today for was to announce that my foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropist, is going to make a new $375 million commitment to improving education in America. Thank you. I would love to tell you that that amount of money makes an enormous difference, but if you think about the New York City school budget being something around $20 billion a year, you'll understand just how big the problem is. Nevertheless, the private philanthropy can do some things in terms of demonstration projects and research and investigation and advocacy, and so that's what the money is going to be used for. Our strategy is premised on three main ideas that we're going to focus on with this money. First is that education is a local issue. The federal government matters, but change is most likely to come from cities and states, and so all our investments will be at the local level. Second, education is a political issue, so investing in advocacy and electoral campaigns is critical to driving change. In my own giving outside of the foundation, I personally support candidates at the district, city, and state levels who are standing up for these kinds of changes, and my daughter Emma has a nonprofit that she started that works to help other places do exactly that through the political process, reform education. Philanthropists, unfortunately, have been hesitant to get involved in political campaigns, but democracy shouldn't be a dirty word. The people we elect are the ones we have to hold responsible for accomplishing change, and if we want them to do something, we have to make it known through our donations to their campaigns and voting at the ballot box. The third pillar of our strategy is the one that I'd like to zero in on this afternoon, give it our limited time. It's the idea that we have to move past ideological arguments and what I think are false choices and focus on what works in education based on what the data tells us. One of the big false choices that is the debate over education is the ideological argument about college. One side thinks that every student should get an acceptance letter from a four-year college. And the other side argues that college is overrated and then we should focus on preparing young people for well-paid careers that don't require a four-year education. And the truth is, this is not an either-or situation. We need to do both, put more focus on college and careers so that students have a real choice. And yet right now, we're not doing either one very well. Today, about 40% of teenagers do not enter college immediately after high school. Some of them graduate from high school, others don't even make it that far. But whether they graduate or not, we haven't given them the skills and training they need to begin a career, and they pay for that for the rest of their lives in limited opportunities and lost earnings. So some go to college and some don't. But the problem is that a lot that go to college aren't prepared to succeed there. Partly as a result of that, the national graduation rate for four-year college is only 40%. And even after 6 years, that only grows to 60% of students who enter that graduate. So 40-odd% never get a college degree. They've spent a lot of time and a lot of money, but it's not clear that they have what they need to succeed in life. So on one hand, as evidenced by the low college graduation rate, we are not preparing high school graduates for success in college. And on the other, we effectively treat non-college bound students as second-class citizens, giving them no preparation for their next step in life. Both, I think, are outrageous, and we owe our kids better than that. Bloomberg Philanthropies, I'm happy to say, is working on both of these challenges, and our game plan begins with a simple idea. We believe that states, districts, and schools must deliver better results. And to do that, they need to start with specific year-by-year college and career readiness goals. These goals, we think, should be written down and made public so that parents and elected officials can hold schools accountable for achieving them. Otherwise, schools will continue skating along by only good intentions and lofty rhetoric. Of course, setting clear short-term goals is really the easy part of all of this. The hard part is actually doing the work necessary to meet those goals. Our foundation is supporting leaders who are willing to try new approaches to both tracks, college and career. And I'd just like to touch briefly on each, and then we can talk a little bit more about them in the Q&A with Frank. Let's start by what it takes to prepare students for the choice between college or a career, improving achievement levels in the early grades. And by now, there is plenty of evidence for what works. Raising standards for students, raising salaries for teachers in exchange for greater accountability, giving principals the freedom to hire, manage, and train school staff, ensuring that every classroom is led by a skilled and effective teacher, ensuring that teachers who fail, even after getting mentoring and professional development, can be moved out of the classroom, and giving students and parents more quality school options, including charters. Taking these steps aren't easy, given the institutional forces aligned against them, but I think it is possible, and our experience in New York City shows the difference it can make. Between Joel Klein and Dennis Walcott, New York City schools in 12 years really did get an awful lot better, and we followed basically those points that I just enumerated. We raised teachers' salaries in exchange for greater accountability, and Randy Weingarten, the former head of the UFT here, and I recently co-wrote an op-ed about that bargain. It's evidence that elected officials and union officials really can come together, we think, to improve both teacher pay and student outcomes. And over the course of our time in City Hall, the percentage of students in the city's public schools earning a Regents or Advanced Regents degree, which for a generation was a proxy for college readiness, doubled from 30 to 60%. At the same time, graduation rates in New York City increased by 42%. In New York, we also closed down failing schools and opened 650 new public schools, charters and non-charters alike, including 46 schools focused on career and technical education. And in New York, those 650 new schools had graduation rates 10 points higher than their peers in larger schools, with Black and Hispanic students leading the way. Today, our foundation is supporting cities and states that are taking similar approaches to the ones that we took here. In places like Tennessee and Washington, D.C., we're seeing some encouraging results. Both are among the fastest improving places in student achievement after being at the bottom not long ago. And as I said at the outset, we're supporting candidates and elected officials who have the courage to stick their necks out for those kinds of changes in the K-12 education. As important as college readiness is, we have to make sure that students who are really actually attending schools that match their abilities. Think about this. Less than half of 1% of students from the poorest 20% of families attend a selective college, even though many have the grades to get in there. Or consider this. Only 6% of kids at top colleges come from the poorest families. And over 50% of qualified low-income students don't even apply to the selective schools. If we want to stop intergenerational poverty, we have to start by helping more of those deserving kids go to good schools. The better the college, the better the education students receive, and the better the education they have, the better the opportunities they will have in their success in life. Our foundation has launched two initiatives designed to change that. One is called the American Talent Initiative, and it's a coalition of top colleges and universities across the country that are committed to increasing the number of lower-income, high-performing students that they accept and graduate. 100 of the nation's best colleges have signed up, and our goal is for another 50,000 low-income students to enroll in those schools by the year 2025. The second initiative is called College Point. It helps high-achieving, lower-income students, many of whom are not getting the kind of college guidance counseling they need. As a result, they often don't realize that they are qualified to attend top schools, or don't know how to apply to them, or just how much financial aid is available to them. Through counseling over the phone, texting, video chat, and email, we help them through the application process and work to make sure that they apply to and enroll in the kind of schools that they have earned the right to attend. Already, I'm happy to say 40,000 students have participated in College Point, and our goal is for more than half of the high-achieving, lower-income students nationally to enroll in top colleges by 2020. Through these two initiatives, we are working to increase the supply of top colleges for qualified lower-income students and to increase the demand for attending top colleges among those students. One is the supply side, and one is the demand side. Now let me turn to the other side of the equation, clearer career and technical education. For too long as a country, we have been afraid to acknowledge that some high school students don't want to remain in academia after they turn 18. But what other options are we giving them? The answer is practically none. Around the country, vocational schools and programs have been eliminated, and many of those that survive are still trapped in the 1960s and 1970s, and they are often stigmatized as no more than a dumping ground and certainly not a learning lab. As a result, it shouldn't be surprising that many students drop out of those schools. After all, if you determine that college isn't for you, what good is it to spend your days taking classes that are effectively college prep? Yes, a high school diploma has value in and of itself, but trying to convince bored or struggling teenagers to stay in school based on data about lifetime's earnings is about as effective as trying to get them to stop looking at their cell phones. In New York City, one of the reasons I think we were able to cut the dropout rate in half was by finding new ways to keep students engaged, including creating schools that offered education and skill training in particular industries. One school, called P-Tech, we started in collaboration with IBM. We created Energy Tech High School in partnership with National Grid, and the Health, Education, and Research Occupation High School we opened in partnership with the City University of New York and a medical center in the Bronx. Now, not all of the students attending those schools ultimately will go into those fields, but the schools keep them engaged and expose them to a world of possibilities beyond high school in ways that the traditional high schools have never done. But it's not just the dropout rate that we have to consider. Nationally, plenty of students do get a high school diploma, but don't go to college, and are also left with few career options. We have to do more to help both groups, those at risk of dropping out and those that get a diploma but don't go on to college, learn skills that they can put to use in the workforce, in jobs that won't be automated out of existence, jobs like plumbing and automotive mechanics and construction. Now, in many cases, though not at Bloomberg, employers require a college degree for jobs where the actual job responsibilities are very different from what the students learn in college. And I've never thought that that made any sense. And I'd encourage CEOs to rethink it, although our company benefits from their exclusionary policies. I understand why others don't do it. A college degree shows that someone has the discipline and maturity to complete a major undertaking. So we have to teach the young people skills that employers have come to value in making hiring decisions. And learning those skills will also demonstrate their discipline and maturity. This is not only an issue in helping young people. It's a national economic issue. Almost 1/3 of new job openings require a skill of some sort, but not a bachelor's degree. And in many cases, employers are struggling to fill those jobs, which hurts economic growth. But states, unfortunately, have defunded the kinds of schools and programs that teach these skills. And few places are teaching skills that are required for newer jobs that are in demand, like lab technicians and help desk operators, and you can go on and on. These jobs are no less important than the jobs that require bachelor's degrees, and we need states to start treating them that way by investing in high-quality career and technical education programs and schools. In some areas, school districts can improve training by tapping into the support from the local business community. Some cities and states have begun doing this, and we've been working to support them. Programs like CareerWise in Denver, Youth Force in New Orleans, and Career Pathways in Delaware are all public-private partnerships based on the same principle. Employers providing education and skill development in a wide variety of fields, and in exchange, they get access to a pipeline of future workers. The students who go through these programs get four main benefits. They get real work experience. They get community college credit while they're in high school, if they want to use that. They get options to continue on into an associate or bachelor's degree program or additional job certification, if that's what they finally decide to do after being exposed to other things. And when they complete the program, they have the chance to interview for full-time positions. We believe other cities and states can learn from these programs, and hopefully more political and business leaders will step up to create similar programs, and we'll support those that do. Education really is the key to truly fulfilling the promise of America as a land of opportunity for all. It's an enormous challenge, but I'm going to keep doing my part, and I'm optimistic about the progress that we can make in years ahead. But make no mistake about it, the spoils will go to the better educated people. And if we continue to provide the kind of schools that we do to the poor neighborhood kids, they will never get out of poverty. Joel Klein used to say, you have to fix education before you fix poverty, not the mantra of the reverse. You have to get a good education, and we are not doing our job as a society, and we've just got to start doing it. So thank you, and I look forward to answering some questions from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor, for your thoughts and for your commitment to education and to higher education in particular. I'm curious, in your 12 years as mayor, in terms of your successes, but especially maybe your failures or missed opportunities, what did you learn that is informing this particular approach to philanthropy now?
Well, there isn't one answer to everything, and you're never going to overnight revolutionize everything. The world evolves slowly, particularly when the political process is there. I learned that you can't do anything to solve any of our major social problems unless you fight your way through the political reluctance to make change. In government, we tend to continue to fund programs that aren't working and not move monies over to programs that do work, whereas in business, you do exactly the reverse. But in order to protect the jobs of those in the program that's not working, we tend to think about the providers more than the beneficiaries, and that's a terrible mistake. And the other thing I've learned is that the public isn't as dumb as our elected officials want them to think. If you take a look at the number of parents who want to get their kids into charter schools or want to go and really study the system and find ways to use the rules in another kind of public school, a non-charter public school, parents want to do this. The real problem you have for some kids is that the Norman Rockwell family no longer exists. So a lot of kids aren't raised by the traditional two-family parents. In many cases, there are no parents. They're raised by a sister or an uncle or a grandmother or something like that that might not have the skills and the understanding of how you work within the system to affect change and to do something better for your kid. So just because you have options isn't enough. You've got to find some ways to let the public really use it. One thing occurred to me, there's something called the Earned Income Tax Credit, which it really has nothing to do with taxes. You have to work, but if you work, you can, and you're at a low level of income, you can qualify, and you get, let's say, $5,000 a year. But you just have to apply. And we've talked about this all the time, but nobody ever does anything to get people to apply. So one of the things we did in New York City is we took the tax rolls and we had the computer spit out and create an application form for Earned Income Tax Credit for everybody who qualified. And we sent it to them with a stamped envelope. All they had to do is sign their name, and they would start getting $5,000 a year. 20% never did. We couldn't quite figure out why. But the 80% that did, we got them going. And I think it just shows you have to make the program available, but then you got to get people to use it. And generally, government doesn't want to do that because then they got to pay for it. They just like the idea of voting a program, but they don't like to go to the public and say, you're going to have to pay for it.
I'm curious for your opinion on something I haven't heard you talk on. Maybe you haven't, I missed it. But we've now had teacher walkouts for higher pay in 6 states. You had tense relationships with the teachers union, but you also believe in robust teacher pay. Do you think strikes and walkouts are a legitimate kind of action and the right way to go?
Well, I don't think anybody remembered, but shortly after, maybe a year after I got in office, I went to the public and said, we're raising taxes. And you had thought that I was the world's worst person. My popularity went down. I think I might have set a record low for any mayor in the history of New York City, and I was the 108th, so there were plenty of other opportunities.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. 2 or 3 years later, I got reelected, so it turned out okay. But I said to the public, you got to pay your teachers if you want to have your kids educated. You got to pay your sanitation workers and your cops and your firefighters and that sort of thing. It takes money. I wrote this op-ed with Randy Weingarten, Oklahoma, where the former, just retired as president of the University of Oklahoma, former senator and governor David Boren, fought like as hard as he could against the legislature to raise teachers' salaries. They finally, I think, got a minimum wage, but they were getting paid $25,000 a year. What kind of a teacher are you going to get for $25,000 a year? I'm sure there are dedicated people, but most people that are dedicated still have to eat. And so Randy and I wrote this article saying, now I'm a big believer in you have to have more accountability. I think I'm a believer that we have to work with the teachers if they can't do the job and help them. But if they can't do it even after that, you just have to replace them. You can't have a teacher that can't teach in front of a classroom. And we tend to put the teachers that are some of the newer ones and some of those that aren't as aggressive in the schools where the kids need the most, in poorer neighborhoods. The poor will never get out of poverty unless we do something, and yet we tend not to do that. The politics of assigning teachers and assigning police officers and all government services is you send them to the wealthy neighborhoods rather than to the poor neighborhoods that need them more. And the reason government always does that, and we tried to fight against that, we didn't do it, but the reason it's done is because it's the wealthy neighborhoods that make campaign donations and drive people to the polls and write op-eds and vote. And so the elected officials go where the political power is, not where the need is.
You frequently mention when you're talking about the importance of higher education, global competitiveness.
Yes.
And it's a cornerstone of that. Do President Trump's trade policies, his fixation on tariffs, and his anti-immigration emphasis run counter to global competitiveness and undermine it?
Leaving the president out of this, I cannot conceive of a policy that is worse for this country and for other countries than having a trade war. It just makes no sense whatsoever. If you think about global trade, it literally reduced poverty around the world by 50% in the last few decades, mostly in the third world. And if you measure poverty by a roof over your head, a meal in your stomach, and being literate. And to cut back on global trade doesn't make any sense from that point of view. To cut back just from a selfish point of view, America, yes, we have a trade deficit, but we have a trade deficit in the same sense that I have a trade deficit with my barber. I pay him, and he doesn't give me any money back. You can value the haircut as less than what I pay him. That doesn't make any sense.
That's a surprising metaphor.
Okay, yeah. but my point is, there's this idea there's a winner and a loser. It doesn't work that way. And in the modern day, where an automobile goes across the Mexican border back and forth a number of times before it gets to the showroom, and if you were to stop that, which we're not going to stop it, can't conceive of stopping it. It's because then we're not going to have any cars. If you want a trade war with China, you've got to improve our investment in companies and in creating new products and compete on the basis that America is strongest on. We still have the best higher education. We still have the ethic where you can create more business, although the Chinese are certainly catching up. What we have to do is get away from our whole government policies and plans are till the next temporary budget cycle. China has a 5- and 10-year plan. They've got a Belt in the Road thing. They're going around the world making investments for the long term, and America's got a 3-year plan, a 3-month plan.
Are some of these suggested measures and some of this rhetoric actually discouraging talented people whom we'd like to be in this country from coming here?
I have had, I don't want to say a lot, but I've had half a dozen people, both here and in London, ask me when I was just walking by, shaking hands, chit-chatting, can I move to someplace else in Bloomberg? They don't like me here, meaning in America, after some of the language that comes out of Washington, or in the UK, the same thing. So yes, I mean, the words have consequences. And if you're worried, even if we give somebody a short-term visa, you can't move your family here and plan a long-term career. We need to bring in people from around the world that will create new businesses. And all the studies that we ever did in New York City, where we estimated we had like 500,000 undocumented, all the studies showed they have low crime rate. They don't use the hospitals very much because they're young and you use hospitals when you're older. They don't use the schools very much because a lot of them come without their kids. There's some of all of those things. They are worried about getting deported, so they certainly don't have a high crime rate. But they do work. And they don't, this is not a place to come to if you want to go on welfare. It just is not. There's plenty of other places that are better.
So the president is telling the American people a lie?
I haven't heard what he said recently. I don't bother to read that part of the New York Times.
Yeah.
No, but I think common sense says, I don't know where some of that stuff comes from, but I think trade policy, we're going in exactly the wrong direction, and hopefully it is rhetoric. Look, you want to talk about Donald Trump? He is opposed to background checks on guns. He says he doesn't believe in climate change. My great hope is that somebody convinces him in both of those cases that he's wrong, and he changes his point of view. That would be good for the country. Now, you can say, wait a second, it would be a win for the other side. No, it would show that he's listened to his advisors and made a better decision. And he's certainly shown that he can change his mind.
Multiple times.
I didn't say that. You said that. Let the record show.
I'm an op-ed columnist. I can say it, yeah. We only have time for one more question. You mentioned charters.
Yes.
You're a big fan of charters, and there are some extraordinary charters here in
New York City. Charters
we have an education secretary from a state where, largely under her urging, the charter experiment was a complete debacle.
Yes.
How does one make sure to get the best of charters and not the worst of charters?
Well, I'm not an expert. You should call Dennis Walcott before you write your next column, or Joel Klein, and they'll give you what we did in New York. That doesn't mean it's going to work every place. Charter schools are not the only answer. I will say in New York City, they provide a great example for the public schools. That's the first thing you've got to remember. And they provide a great example for the non-public schools, non-charter public schools. And where they've been co-located, in many cases, it's improved both of them. That's a very good strategy. And the waiting list for parents to get kids into charter schools is, many years. It's oversubscribed more than they can possibly grow. But I think about 125,000 kids go to charter schools out of 1,250,000. So maybe 10% go to public charter schools. And almost all of them have worked very well here. And it's partly the supervision and withdrawing the charter if they don't have results. And a press following what those results are so that there's pressure on them all the time that somebody's watching. A free press is one of the great things that we have in America. Unfortunately, it starts to become ideological in this day and age, but the press should be independent and tell us the truth of what works and what doesn't. And unfortunately, because they want more clicks and eyeballs and advertising's gone off to elsewheres, there's a lot less of that. The press is more willing to engage in sensationalism.
Quickly, because we've only got 11 seconds, Betsy DeVos, what has she done or not done that most concerns you? And if you want to give her a grade on a
well, I don't know enough. Her idea of vouchers just doesn't make any sense because there aren't places you could use vouchers. That's not a solution. I never met her, I don't think. Maybe I shook her hands once. People say she's smart. I haven't seen anything that I really agreed with, so I don't know.
I thought you were going to say I haven't seen the evidence.
Okay, but I haven't been following her. In all fairness, I'm not trying to take a cheap shot at her. I think the answer, you should ask her and ask her to justify what she believes and why she believes it, and I'm sure she's done some good things and some things that I wouldn't agree with.
Mayor, thank you for your time, but mostly for your commitment.
Thank you, everyone.